Okay, so like I said, as our counselor, it is our job whether we are a Christian counselor or a counselor who's a Christian, our job is to look out for the best interests of our clients, to meet them where they are at. Whether we are a Christian counselor or a counselor who's a Christian, our job is never to impose our own values, morals, and beliefs onto our client. Rather, our job is to ask questions, to encourage, to challenge, and to bear witness to whatever they bring into the room and wherever they're at in their process. Really, it's kind of similar to a parent transitioning from being a parent of a child to a parent of a teenager or a young adult. Your role shifts in letting your kids, who are then becoming teenagers and young adults, it shifts into letting them figure things out, making mistakes, supporting them in what they do, even when they don't always do things the way that you wish that they would. Your job is to walk through things with them, to walk through them when they're dealing with consequences of their choices, while simultaneously not shaming them, but also helping them not to justify their consequences or act like a victim. And that's very similar to our role as a counselor. It's kind of giving our clients a platform or freedom to start to ask questions and figure things out on their own. It's not to tell them what to do. As a therapist, our job is to treat the whole person. You might hear me say I consider myself to be a holistic counselor, and that's because I address the body, mind, and spirit. I don't see how you can take the three of those and compartmentalize and do counseling. And now this is where many people get confused between Christian counseling and non-Christian counseling. Most people think that non-Christian counseling only treats the behaviors rather than the root issues. Now, that is true for some therapists, as they might be a behavioral therapist or a cognitive behavioral therapist, where they're going to look more at changing the behaviors rather than the root issue. But that is simply one or two theories of counseling, and in general, most counselors expand far outside of those two theories regarding how they work with their clients. There is definitely a myth that Christian counselors would treat the whole person, body, mind, and spirit, whereas non-Christian counselors would treat just kind of the body and the actions. However, that isn't necessarily true. Most counselors I've met, whether they are Christian or non-Christian, view the person as a whole, recognizing that even though there might be a religious difference between you and your client, that there is still a spirit that is part of them. A spirit meaning your soul, meaning that is where your values, where your beliefs, where your morals stem from, and then you act out of. We are spiritual beings, regardless of if we are believers or non-believers. So because of that, in a counseling session, it is very appropriate to ask a client what their spiritual or religious beliefs or practices are. You can ask them what they find to be important to them. What, if any, spiritual practices or disciplines they would like to make a part of their treatment process. This is a great way for you as a counselor to be able to gauge what or how you can use spirituality within the session. Regardless of our faith backgrounds, except for very, very extreme circumstances, which I'll touch on in a moment, it is very rare that our job as a therapist is to ever actually tell the client what they should or shouldn't do. Counseling is not about having or giving all of the answers to our clients, which would be an exhausting job in and of itself and would require superhuman knowledge to know the answer for absolutely everything. So counseling is not necessarily about giving all the right answers, but it is really more of that that process of exploring and bearing witness. There's a book that I use with a lot of couples. It's called Scream Free Marriage. And one of the passages within the book talks about how we need to be in charge of our own thoughts and behaviors rather than trying to always change somebody else. And in that book, it's very specific to the marital relationship. But one of the things that he talks about in there, and for those of you who have teenagers or have had teenagers, or are aware of teenagers, or were a teenager. Okay, so I'm covering the whole spectrum here. Okay, you will understand what I mean. Think about, as a teenager, if you are told by a parent, this is how you are supposed to do something, what is your natural inclination? It's probably to do the opposite of what that person tells you. Even if that person has your best interests at heart, even if it's your parents and they love you, our natural inclination as human beings, which of course goes back to a sin issue, but our natural inclination is to rebel against whatever we are told to do, or to just kind of shy away from it and go, I don't know that that's what I want to do. So that translates into the counseling session. If we feel that it's our job to tell clients what they're supposed to do, even if it's a biblical standard, the natural tendency for our client is going to be to pull away from that and maybe do the opposite of what you're suggesting, stop coming to counseling, or maybe discredit the things that you're saying because they're wanting to figure this out for themselves. Now, there are certain circumstances where it could be beneficial to tell a client something very directly. This would be cases involving abuse or some sort of harm. But even in this, it's very careful that as you're telling clients things, that your job actually is to empower them to make decisions. If you think about a woman who's in an abusive situation, they are used to their voice not being heard. They are used to be told that they're crazy, that what they think doesn't matter. And so really our job as therapists then, while we might say this is a very dangerous and abusive circumstance, I really would like for you to get out of it, they are ultimately the ones who have to make the choice to get out of it. So it's our job as therapists then to empower the client to make that choice. So I realize that's a very extreme circumstance, although you probably will come across it in your client sessions as you move on through this career. But essentially, even though we're telling our clients something very specific, we are also empowering them. We're not just giving them a recipe to do these things and then they'll be fixed or healed or whatever it is. We are giving them a direct statement followed by a sense of being able to be empowered to make a change. So one of the best things that you can do as a Christian counselor who is seeing a Christian client is to ask questions. If they're bringing up an issue and they've already told you that they're a believer or that they, that they live by God's word, what you're going to want to do if they're bringing up an issue is notice that it's clear that there's some sort of internal dissidence, or they wouldn't be talking about this issue. So ask them questions that might help them come to a greater understanding of themselves, their actions, where they want to change, what they believe, why there is this dissidence. That can be your duty as a Christian counselor in working with a Christian to help them make choices that are in line with God's word, but that they are able to come to and own because that's what they believe rather than being told that's what they're supposed to believe. What can be so confusing is that many Christian counseling centers, like I said earlier, are tied to churches. And so often the question becomes, or might become, that if a person is living in sin and talks about it to their Christian counselor, that this could be grounds for church discipline. While it is true that many churches do offer Christian counseling as part of their church and their ministry, what's also important to recognize is that in a way these are two separate entities. This is why it's also so important to maintain ethical standards like confidentiality. Because without these ethical standards in place, it's very tempting for Christian counselors to involve outside parties in gathering information and trying to help somebody seek reconciliation, growth, healing, challenging, those sorts of things. All of it is in the name of caring about somebody's spiritual health. But I say this because, unfortunately, I have seen this done many times and seen many people leave the church, the Big C church, altogether because of the way their confidentiality was destroyed by others who involved people without the client's consent and ended up causing significant strife within the relationships. See, one of the most beautiful, healing, and working parts of counseling is that our client is what the client is protected by within the ethical standards. If a client has to worry about their story getting out, this would not be a safe place to share the intimate details of your life. So having ethical standards in place allows the client the protection to know, regardless of the junk that they're bringing onto the table, there is at least one person in the world who they can talk to who will not violate their confidence, gossip, bring it up to other sources, maybe say it's a prayer request for somebody that they know. And it's amazing just how healing this alone, like having a safe place to tell your story, can be. So, in regards to transforming ethics, this does go in many ways hand in hand with regular ethical standards that you might find in your state or national ethical codes. While transforming ethics are unique to Christian counseling, they can be easily implemented into a counselor's ethical world. One thing you might consider, though, is how people's interpretation of the Bible, whether it's between different individuals or denominations, might actually skew what transformational ethical guidelines would be and how this actually looks in session. See, this is where it can get really tricky. So somebody from a Baptist background who is a Christian counselor might have a different view or interpretation of the Bible than somebody who is a Catholic Christian counselor. So this is where we have to be really careful. In a classroom like this even, there are many different opinions on how situations should be handled. None of them go against biblical standards, but all of you come from a very unique application of how you apply the Bible in your life personally and professionally. And this can often lead to then much subjectivity in regards to ethics. So, to be clear, there is nothing wrong with transforming ethics, nor does anybody in the class think so from what I've read. There's nothing wrong with transforming ethics when it comes to clients and how to look out for the best interests. It seems that the ethical guidelines, as approved by our states and our nation, seem to be the standard by which other ethical codes need to be filtered through. What I mean by this is it's important to remember that because ethical guidelines set by our state and our national codes do not in any way violate biblical principles, that because of that they are actually very good. They are for our protection, both as clients and as counselors, and in applying these ethics to our practices, we are still very much in line with what God's Word says. So, that's kind of my conclusion of our group discussion board from this week. I very much appreciated the participation level that everybody exampled. It's so fun to be able to participate in this and to read these things and then to be able to come in and add opinions and thoughts and ask questions. It's just really, really wonderful. So let's move on from there really quickly. We're going to look at week 3, and it's going to be very similar in nature as to kind of the flavor for what we're doing. So you know what? Oh, here we go. I thought I left my syllabus at my office, but I did not. Okay, so for this week, let me just flip over to the right page. So for this week, the main thing that's going to be different is that you guys are going to be reading through a course or a case study in CourseMate instead of doing a group discussion board from our Clinton text. So you will notice that in place of the Clinton text, you'll be reading through the course study and then you'll be doing a discussion board question on that. Other than that, everything is going to be very much the same as far as the portfolio of competence journal, your quizzes, reading in the Ivy textbook, and then doing the counseling session as well as the follow-up evaluation. All of that's going to be the same, and by now y'all are probably getting a little bit more into the hang of that. The final thing before we leave today is that I did want to offer you a resource. I know that this is something I talked about last week, and really this resource is not at all a requirement for you to read, but I do love to be able to just give you guys books that I have found to be important, both for me personally and with my clients. So if you're ever interested in good reads or growing or learning more And that's why I'm giving these to you. Certainly they're not required, but they're all very excellent. So the book that I am recommending for this week, and I apologize for the way my camera's set up, it's backwards, but it's called The Gifts of Imperfection by a woman named Brené Brown, Berne Brown, Brown, The Gifts of Imperfection. This is an incredible book. The little tagline here says, letting go of who you think you're supposed to be and embracing who you are. Brené Brown is a researcher. She has her doctorate degree. She is a researcher on shame and vulnerability, which is a very hot topic in the church, in the counseling world, in our personal lives. Looking at shame, what does that do to you? How does that change the way you think about yourself and the world? So this book is just a beautiful book talking about what is shame, what is courage, what is vulnerability. She has 10 different what she calls guideposts as to living a wholehearted life. So if you are ever on my counseling Facebook page, you will notice that I post quotes from her all the time. She is just really, really wonderful. She is a believer, but she just has a very candid way of speaking about shame and love and resilience and all of those sorts of things in a very, very practical yet meaningful way. So The Gifts of Imperfection by Brené Brown, that is the book I'm recommending to you for this week. And on that note, that is all I have for you. So I hope that y'all have a great week. Again, it is so wonderful to be able to interact with you, and I look forward to continuing to get to know you through your papers and on the group discussion board. Have a great week.